Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Jill Bialosky is the author of The Deceptions, a novel. Jill is the author of 6 acclaimed collections of poetry, 3 critically acclaimed novels, and 2 memoirs, including History of a Suicide, My Sister's Unfinished Life, a New York Times bestseller. Her poems and essays have appeared in the Best American Poetry, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Harper's Magazine, Oh, the Oprah Magazine, The Kenyon Review, Harvard Review, and the Paris Review, among other publications. She is executive editor and vice president at W.W. Norton and Company, and her work has been a finalist for the James Laughlin Award, the Patterson Poetry Prize, and the Books for a Better Life Awards. In 2014, she was honored by the Poetry Society of America for her distinguished contribution to poetry. She lives in New York City. Welcome, Jill. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss your latest novel, The Deceptions.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I have to tell you that when I started reading your book, it was a Sunday with a driving rainstorm, and my husband had been watching football all day, and I was reading, and it was just around dinner time, and I was like, this is so creepy. This is exactly what's happening in this book. And I even said something to my husband. He's like, wouldn't it be amazing if everything you read in a book would make your whole life change that way? Like you open the book and it would start raining or something. Anyway, so I felt very immersed in your opening moments of the scene and your relationship and all of that.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really fun to write. I think my husband heard me, or he saw some review in print that said something about that scene. And I said, well, it's archetypal. It's not just you.
Right. I mean, I don't think you made him come off that great. So you might as well say it's somebody totally different. Why don't you tell listeners what The Deceptions is about and why write this book right now?
Yes, thank you. So when the novel opens, my character she's a middle-aged woman. She's just sent her only son off to college, and she's feeling very bereft and a little lost about what her next chapter means. And she's also a poet, and she teaches at an all-boys prep school. And when the novel opens, she's in this crisis, and along with her son leaving, she's trying to avoid thinking about an incident that happened to her with a visiting poet at the school in which she teaches. And so the novel really does, I think that, the name of your podcast, I'm hoping that the novel will really be the kind of novel that women will want to read and relate to and celebrate in some ways. It's also about a woman sort of figuring out that she never really has fully found her own agency and power. And so through the novel, you get the sense of what she's been up against teaching at a institution founded on the patriarchy, and also a poet still, in her eyes, dominated by male power. And also the way in which she has to reconcile her feelings about being a woman who is closely near the point in life where she still feels desire, but so she's also reconciling with what that means within a marriage.
Many relatable themes to so many people out there.
Yeah, I hope so, Zibby. I do.
I feel like I just interviewed yesterday Liz Michalski. I don't know. Do you know who she is, the author? She
No.
wrote this beautiful book called Darling Girls. It's a new take on the aftermath of Peter Pan and the Darling Girls. Anyway,
Oh.
it's really beautiful and clever. And she's like grieving that her child just went to college. She's like in that very raw spot. So I feel like you need to send your book to her.
Oh, good.
I think that would help. I feel like you two should
will.
connect, or I think that would help her right now. Maybe I'll just send her your book. Is frankly what I should do. But anyway, so you've written a lot of books, and actually, somebody I told, they said, "Who are you interviewing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm doing Jill Bialosky," and they were like, "The poet." So that is how you're known in certain circles. You are amazing poet and novelist and narrative nonfiction. Like you do everything. When do you decide to do what? Why a novel right now and not poetry? And how did you even get involved in all of this writing and editing? And I want to talk about your publishing career, and there's just so much. I'm overwhelmed.
Oh. Well, I started writing really, poetry was my first love. And when I was in college, I was very fortunate I was an English major and I took a few poetry workshops. And I was very fortunate to work with a wonderful poet, Stanley Plumley, who was my first teacher. And somehow he just gave me the confidence to feel that I could continue to develop my craft as a poet. And that took me then to get an MFA. I went to the writer's workshop at the University of Iowa and I studied poetry there. And then when I was at Iowa, the program is divided into fiction writers and poets. And I became very conscious of this idea that these fiction writers, they were so interested in publishing and they were just so far ahead of the poets in terms of ambition. And it really kind of struck me. And I was reading a lot of novels at that time, and I read one novel by Marilyn Robinson called Housekeeping, which you must know and maybe have read, which is such a beautiful book. And when I read that novel, I felt like I had a novel in me that needed to come out. And so my first novel was called House Under Snow. And that took me many, many years to figure out how to write a novel. But it also allowed me to feel very comfortable with prose and with shifting back and forth from poetry to prose. And so I think that was just all kind of a journey that I wanted to pursue. And I just, it's a lot of hard work. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it, but I think I really was driven to write that first novel. And I'm so glad that I did. And then it allowed me to want to tell other stories in fiction. And so I find fiction and poetry so different. Poetry is much more internal in some ways, bringing out kind of the inner life more through words, through narrative. And for me, fiction is so much about characters, and you can be expansive in telling a story. So I really, love both. And, I really didn't think that I was going to write nonfiction, but, I had a terrible loss in my life. My youngest sister ended her life when she was 21. And I just could not stop telling myself that I had to write about it. And maybe you feel that way, Zibby. You just told me about your book, that so that the first memoir that I wrote, History of a Suicide, my sister's unfinished life, really allowed me to, I couldn't have done that in fiction. I mean, some of my poems are about that kind of loss, but somehow I needed that larger landscape to investigate. So that's kind of how it all sort of, one thing grows out of another, as it's interesting. You never know what you're going to be up against and how you're going to find the right words or the right form to get there.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry about your sister, and
Thank you.
I'm very sad I didn't have time to read that memoir because I did research it, and it sounds like you did it in a really unique way, basically inhabiting her mind and telling the story
Yes.
from her point of view and how she got to that point. And I don't know if you can talk even a little more about that book, because
Yeah,
I
well,
have to go back and read it.
well, thank you. Well, I'm very excited because my publisher, Atria, is reissuing History of a Suicide for a 10th anniversary.
Oh,
And it's
great.
coming out in November. And it comes with a preface by Andrew Solomon, who's somebody whose work I so admire. So I'm very, very happy that that book will be more visible because, as you probably know, I think during the pandemic, so many young people have been suffering, and sadly, the suicide rates for younger people are rising. And my hope is that my book could show people who are suffering the wounds that are left behind by the survivors and offer some sense of hope. So it was a long process that took me about 10 years to really work through that memoir. And I recently read it for audio, and that was really,
You must have been sobbing. Were you just sobbing?
I was very lucky that I had these two wonderful young men, directing, and one was doing the technology, and they got me through it. But I just felt like I had to narrate it. I didn't feel like somebody else should narrate that story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. But, time helps. And yes, and I'm glad the book is there to document that process.
By the way, you brought my book up. You make it sound like I was trying to hawk my book to you.
No,
You brought it
I'm
up.
so impressed
But,
with what you do.
thank you. But I lost one of my best friends from high school to suicide. So I did write about that in the book. She had developed, I don't know about your sister because I haven't read it, but she had developed mental illness over time, and it was sort of excruciating to watch that and not be able to really help. So anyway, it is a unique form of loss, but all loss is horrific. So anyway, I'll just say.
I'm so sorry. I know how difficult that is. I felt so deeply for my sister's best friends, who suffered her loss.
Well, you're so empathetic at that time to be even feeling for them when you are going through this. So such immediate loss. Do you feel like some people say, oh, well, I'm glad this happened? Not really, but because I'm glad, but because this happened, at least I got this new perspective on life, where I realized that life was short and to, grab the bull by the horns and do X, Y, Z. Do you feel that at all? Do you feel like it changed your relationship with life?
Well, it definitely changed my relationship with life because I realized naively that, you never think something like that is going to happen. And so I think that for me, it was like I came to realize how vulnerable people are, and, that some have more of the resources to be able to get help when they are suffering, and others, for whatever reason, can't, or at least at that moment can't. So I think the loss of my sister did make me more empathetic, obviously, as a person, and also more aware of how, fragile life is, and also more committed to the idea that as a writer, this is what we have to offer. I don't know how I would have suffered that loss without being able to put it into words. So more and more, I feel like we're living in dark times, but yet we've got these authors who can somehow take us into a different experience or shed light on our own experience. So I think that's what it has given me, Zibby, more than anything. There's a larger purpose beyond just ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do feel that part of the urge to write about loss, and I have interviewed so many people and because I love those types of books myself, is witnessing people go through something horrific and sort of rising from it. I mean, I like a lot of different stories, but there's something just so deeply resonates with that. So I think it's part of it is to work through it yourself as the writer, as the person, as the feeler. But I think there's also this compulsion once you realize like this big secret, right? That we have to treat life differently. You want to wake everybody else up and be like, no, this is literally the most important thing. And I'm going to tell you my story so that hopefully you will also wake up without having to go through a loss like this. Like, look what happened. Look what could happen. So it's almost like it's a warning, but also intended to be motivational, I think, for other people. I think that's part of why people who have gone through these things want to share them, to say, wait, look at what can happen. Don't squander the day.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. I did an event with a writer, A.M. Holmes, who has a book out called The Unfolding. And we did this event together at McNally Jackson. And our books are so different, but we realized that both of us were kind of writing about the patriarchy and how it has influenced us as women. Hers really through the lens of creating a character who is, well, very conservative and wants to, kind of like a Steve Bannon character, and how that affects his family. And of course, my novel is much more about how the patriarchy has affected this one character. But just to my point is that after our reading, people came up to us and said, wow, we need novels to show us that this still exists. We think that that it's still somehow easier for women to get published, to get their books out there, but there still are, I think, some deep scars.
Interesting.
So just back to that point of even what a novel can do to awaken us as readers and to allow us to see that those ingrained scars or scars that give you ultimately some agency.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wait, so Jill, tell me about your career in publishing also. So you're not just a poet and a memoirist and a novelist, but you are the upper echelon at Norton. And how has that been? Have you always, I mean, you must have been working in publishing all along.
Yes.
And what is it like now being the person who is choosing the books and making the statements and all of that?
Yeah, well, I feel so fortunate to be an editor at Norton. I've worked here my entire career, basically, in publishing, and it's really an honor to be able to to find authors and writers and nurture their books and watch their works come into being. So I've worked with some incredible poets for our Norton Stellar Poetry List. And then I also edit some wonderful fiction writers and nonfiction writers. So it's, I have to say it's almost like, continuing to have education way beyond graduate school. So, it's really, I was trying to write an essay about this, that what happens when the editor becomes the author and her book is about to be published. And I was just thinking about, how when it's my turn, everything I know about the publishing industry suddenly kind of vanishes. And I'm just like, new kid on the block again, hoping her book will get some attention. It's very, very weird. I really makes me totally understand how my authors feel those first the month or two leading up to publication, and then the month or two after, and then once they're books are out there, it's like total freedom again. You don't feel you have to worry anymore. But it is an interesting perspective. As a writer, I sometimes do wish that I kind of lived outside of New York and could just have blinders on and not think about the hype and the aspects of the business. But that's not how my life turned out.
But you mentioned earlier your book had been published by Atria. So why not publish with Norton?
Oh, long time ago, I just thought that would be too weird because
Yeah.
I would then it would almost feel a little bit like self-publishing because I would hear, I'd be in the meetings and, yeah, for me, I don't think that would work well. I think it's good to have that separation. And, I really do have developed boundaries between myself as a writer and then as an editor. I think that's really important. Because when I show up for my job, I have to be there completely for my colleagues that I work with and my authors.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What are some books you've edited lately that you're excited about or that you're working on now?
Well, so right now, I was really thrilled because one of my authors, Mary Roach, her book, Fuzz, is for the fourth week on the New York Times bestseller list. So that's in paperback. So that's very exciting. And we just published a wonderful novel by Lan Samantha Chang called The Family Chow, which is just, here it is for you to see. It's just out now in paperback, and Obama picked it as one of his favorite books of the year.
Amazing.
And that was so exciting. Just looking around at my bookshelves here in my office, I published a fabulous novel by Kirsten Valdez-Quaid called The Five Wounds, which won the Center for Fiction Award.
I'm actually on the board there.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
What a great organization. Yes. And I also have a novel that I edited that's on the long list for the Center for Fiction Award called Activities of Daily Living by Lisa Chen. That is so original. And then in poetry, I published this young writer, Roger Reeves, his second collection called Best Barbarians, which is on the National Book Award long list for poetry this year.
Congratulations.
So it's been a really exciting season for me. And another poet that I brought to Norton years ago, Joy Harjo, she was poet laureate for 3 terms, and we have her new book out called Poet Warrior, which is wonderful. So yes, I'm very rich in talent here.
That's great.
Yeah.
So inspirational to be in all these books and everything for you as a writer too, right? And I feel that way.
Yeah, it really is.
Wonderful. So from all of your experience, what advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Yes, I think that my advice would be to trust yourself as a young writer, to trust your own vision and not feel that you have to write what you think is fashionable at the moment, that everybody has their own story to tell, whether it's through fiction or poetry or nonfiction, and to find that story. Just going back to what I said about Stanley Plumley, my poetry teacher who passed away a few years ago, sadly. But the one thing that he told me when I was 18 or 19 years old and was in his poetry workshop, he told our class to write what hurts. So, for me, that opened a door.
I'm writing that down.
Because there's a certain sense of urgency if you're really writing from that place within you that needs to be heard, and it doesn't mean that it has to come out even autobiographically, but you're just tapping into the essence of who you are. It sounds a little woo.
No, it doesn't.
No, good.
I
Because
get it.
I feel like that's been my guiding light through my projects, that I, like in the Deceptions, I really was trying to, capture this character who is in this crisis and what it means to be a mother and a wife, and also to be a writer, and the whole stew of it. And so each book, when I think back, was kind of inspired by a particular need of mine to investigate. So that's the advice I would give.
Love it. Jill, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I know I told you it's fast.
Yes, no, this was so
I want to keep people's interest. I feel like I tried it longer, and I noticed that everybody stopped listening, and that not only did people stop listening, but if I released longer episodes, people wouldn't even start them.
I think it's great. And I actually want to send you a copy of History of Suicide. So will you email me?
Yes. Yes.
Get your address. That would be such a pleasure for me.
Oh, I would love that. I really would love to read it. Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.